You need this more than I do. Maya Chen placed the crumpled dollar bill back on the table, her voice steady as steel. The man in the worn hoodie, who'd just spent 2 hours making her life hell over a $267 dinner, stared at her like she'd slapped him. What he didn't know, he wasn't just some rude customer. Alexander Stone owned half the restaurants in Manhattan, and this was supposed to be Maya's final test before he destroyed her workplace forever. But Maya Chen doesn't break. Not for money, not for power, not for billionaires who think they can buy respect with cruelty. What happened next would flip both their worlds upside down and change everything they thought they knew about love, class, and what it really means to serve others. Subscribe now, because this story will make you believe that sometimes the waitress gets to rewrite the rules. Maya Chen wiped down the last table of her shift at Sage Restaurant, the soft amber lighting casting warm shadows across the empty dining room. The Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, a reminder of the world that existed just beyond these walls, a world she served but didn't belong to. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, her father's small silver charm bracelet catching the light as she moved. The restaurant was nearly empty now, just past 11 on a Tuesday night, and she was looking forward to getting home to her textbooks and the strategic management assignment that was due tomorrow. That's when he walked in, a man in his early 30s wearing a worn gray hoodie and jeans that had seen better days, carrying a beat-up messenger bag. Maya glanced at the clock. They were technically still open for another hour, but this didn't look like their usual clientele. Sage catered to Manhattan's elite, the kind of people who thought nothing of spending $300 on dinner. This guy looked like he'd wandered in from a coffee shop in Brooklyn. She approached him with her professional smile intact, the one she'd perfected over 2 years of serving people who could buy and sell her entire future without blinking. "Good evening. Table for one?" "Yeah, somewhere quiet if you have it," he said, glancing around the nearly empty space with an odd intensity, as if he were cataloging every detail. His voice carried a slight edge of authority that didn't match his casual appearance, but Maya had learned not to judge customers by their clothes. Some of the wealthiest people she'd served dressed like they'd raided a thrift store. She led him to a corner table by the window, handed him a menu, and launched into her practice spiel about specials and wine pairings. He listened with the kind of focus that made her slightly uncomfortable, as if he were taking notes on her performance rather than deciding what to eat. "I'll have the truffle risotto," he said, without really looking at the menu. "But I want it made with arborio rice from the Piedmont region specifically, and I want the truffles shaved tableside. Also, your wine list says you have a 2010 Barolo. I want to see the bottle before you open it." Maya blinked. The requests were oddly specific and demanding, the kind of thing that would send most servers scrambling to the kitchen in a panic. But she'd dealt with difficult customers before, and something about his tone suggested this was a test rather than genuine pickiness. "Of course, sir. I'll speak with our chef about the rice sourcing and have our sommelier bring the Barolo for your approval." She kept her voice level and professional, even as a small warning bell chimed in the back of her mind. What followed was 90 minutes of the most challenging service of Maya's career. Every dish that came out was met with some complaint. The risotto was too salty, then not salty enough after it was remade. The wine was corked, though the sommelier insisted it was perfectly fine. He sent back his appetizer twice and questioned the temperature of his water. Through it all, Maya maintained her composure, handling each request with grace and finding solutions rather than excuses. She could see the kitchen staff growing frustrated, but she also noticed something else. The way he watched her reactions, studied her responses. This wasn't about the food at all. "Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because I have a feeling you're going to want to see how this story unfolds." When he finally asked for the check, Maya was exhausted but proud of how she'd handled the evening. She'd turned what could have been a disaster into a masterclass in customer service, and she knew it. The bill came to $267, a significant check even for Sage. She placed the leather portfolio on the table and stepped back with a polite smile. "Thank you for dining with us this evening. I hope you'll consider visiting us again soon." He opened the portfolio, pulled out 3 crisp hundreds, and then, in a move that made Maya's heart skip with indignation, added a single crumpled dollar bill as a tip. Attached to the dollar was a small note written in precise handwriting. "Learn to serve better. Service was unacceptable." Maya stared at the money for a long moment, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation that came with being dismissed and diminished. But instead of the anger she expected to feel, something else rose up inside her, a calm certainty about her own worth and the quality of service she'd provided. She picked up the dollar bill, smoothed it out carefully, and walked back to his table with a serene smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she said, placing the dollar bill gently beside his coffee cup. "I think you need this more than I do. Someone who tips $1 on a $267 bill clearly has more pressing financial concerns than I do. I hope your circumstances improve soon." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked toward the service station, her father's charm bracelet catching the light as she moved. Behind her, she heard the scrape of a chair being pushed back, but she didn't turn around. She had textbooks waiting at home and a future to build, one that wouldn't be derailed by one rude customer's opinion of her worth. Alexander Stone sat frozen in his chair, staring at the dollar bill she'd left behind. In 20 years of running restaurants and testing staff, no one had ever handled his deliberate provocation with such dignity and intelligence. Most servers either crumbled under the pressure or became defensive and argumentative. But this woman, Maya, according to her name tag, had turned his own game back on him with such elegant precision that he was still trying to process what had just happened. He'd come to Sage tonight planning to complete his acquisition assessment and move on to the next property in his portfolio. Instead, he found himself genuinely intrigued by a server who refused to be diminished and possessed the kind of emotional intelligence that couldn't be taught or faked. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to his assistant's contact. "Sarah? It's Alex. I need you to cancel the Sage acquisition paperwork. Yes, I know we were supposed to close tomorrow. Something's changed." He ended the call and looked around the restaurant with new eyes, seeing not just another property to be acquired and optimized, but a place where people like Maya could thrive and grow. For the first time in months, Alexander Stone was genuinely curious about someone who couldn't be bought, influenced, or impressed by his wealth and power. And that feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating in ways he wasn't quite ready to examine. As Maya finished her closing duties and gathered her things to leave, she had no idea that the difficult customer she'd just handled would change the entire trajectory of her carefully planned life. The charm bracelet her father had given her on her 16th birthday, the last gift before his sudden death, seemed to catch the light more brightly as she stepped out into the Manhattan night, as if reflecting possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, and the beginning of a love story that would test everything she thought she knew about trust, worth, and the courage required to let someone see who you really are beneath all your carefully constructed defenses. Maya arrived at Sage the next evening with the same professional determination that had carried her through 2 years of juggling graduate school and restaurant work. She'd spent the day in back-to-back MBA classes, her mind focused on market analysis and strategic planning. But the memory of last night's difficult customer lingered like an unfinished equation. Tom Martinez, the restaurant manager, intercepted her before she could tie on her apron, his usually calm demeanor replaced by nervous energy that immediately put her on alert. "Maya, I need to talk to you before your shift starts," Tom said, gesturing toward his small office behind the host stand. "We have a situation tonight, a VIP client who specifically requested you as his server. He's booked our private dining room for 8 o'clock, and he's apparently someone very important in the restaurant industry. I don't have all the details, but corporate called this afternoon and made it clear that this dinner could significantly impact Sage's future." Maya felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with curiosity. In her 2 years at Sage, she'd never had a client specifically request her services, and the mysterious nature of the booking felt oddly familiar in ways she couldn't quite place. The private dining room was Sage's crown jewel, an intimate space with exposed brick walls, soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, and a view of the city that never failed to take her breath away. Maya spent the afternoon ensuring every detail was perfect. The wine glasses polished to a mirror shine. The silverware aligned with military precision. The lighting adjusted to create the perfect ambiance for whatever important business was about to unfold. She'd changed into her best black dress and tied her hair back in a sleek bun. Her father's charm bracelet the only jewelry she wore, a small rebellion against the restaurant's understated elegance policy. At exactly 8 o'clock, Maya heard voices in the main dining room and took a deep breath, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the darkened window. When the private dining room door opened, she turned with her most professional smile ready, only to feel the world tilt sideways as she recognized the man walking toward her. It was him, the difficult customer from last night, but transformed. Gone was the worn hoodie and tired jeans, replaced by a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and his confident stride suggested someone accustomed to commanding attention and respect. "Good evening, Maya," he said, extending his hand with a smile that was both apologetic and genuinely warm. "I'm Alexander Stone, and I owe you an explanation for last night's performance. I also owe you an apology, though I suspect you're going to want to hear the explanation first." Maya stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, her mind racing to process this revelation. Alexander Stone. She knew that name from business magazines and financial newspapers. He owned Stone Hospitality Group, a restaurant empire that spanned 3 continents and employed thousands of people. The realization hit her like a physical blow, followed immediately by a surge of anger that she struggled to keep professional. "You were testing me," Maya said, ignoring his extended hand and crossing her arms instead. "Last night was some kind of elaborate evaluation, and you didn't think I deserved to know that my job performance was being scrutinized by someone who could potentially buy this entire restaurant on a whim." Her voice remained level, but Alexander could hear the steel beneath her controlled tone, the same strength that had impressed him the night before. "You're absolutely right to be angry," he said, lowering his hand, but maintaining eye contact. "What I did was manipulative and unfair, and you handled it with more grace than I deserved. But I'd like the chance to explain why I did it, and more importantly, I'd like to discuss an opportunity that might interest you." Maya gestured toward the table, her training overriding her personal feelings even as her mind churned with questions and indignation. "Please, sit down, Mr. Stone. Though I have to say, your approach to talent evaluation is rather unorthodox." Alexander took his seat, noting the way she maintained perfect posture and professional distance, even while clearly processing her anger. "I test potential employees because I believe in seeing how people perform under pressure when they don't know they're being watched. Most people can fake competence for an interview, but genuine character emerges when someone thinks no one important is paying attention. Last night, you demonstrated problem-solving skills, emotional intelligence, and personal integrity that impressed me more than any resume could." "And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Stone?" Maya asked, pouring water with the same steady hands that had served him the night before, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'm offering you a position with Stone Hospitality Group as a restaurant operations consultant. The salary would be $200,000 annually, plus benefits and equity participation. You'd work directly with me to evaluate and improve service standards across our properties. Your MBA background combined with your frontline experience makes you exactly the kind of person I need to help grow this company." The offer hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Maya felt her breath catch despite her best efforts to remain unaffected. $200,000. The number ricocheted through Maya's mind, representing financial security she'd never imagined possible. The ability to pay off her student loans immediately, to never worry about rent or groceries or whether she could afford new textbooks. But beneath the temptation, warning bells chimed with familiar clarity. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Stone, but I have to wonder why you're so interested in hiring someone you met exactly once, under circumstances you orchestrated. And I have to ask myself what someone like you really wants from someone like me." Her directness seemed to catch him off guard, and Maya saw something flicker across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Someone like me? Alexander repeated, leaning forward slightly. What exactly do you think I am, Maya? The question was delivered with quiet intensity, and Maya realized she was walking into territory that could define the entire trajectory of their interaction. I think you're a wealthy man who's accustomed to getting what he wants through a combination of money and power. I think you're probably used to people saying yes to you because they're either impressed by your success or afraid of your influence. And I think you're testing me again right now, trying to see if I'll back down from speaking honestly just because you could make my life significantly easier or more difficult depending on how I answer. The silence that followed was charged with mutual assessment. Two intelligent people taking each other's measure across the elegant table. Alexander found himself genuinely surprised by her perception and courage, while Maya fought to maintain her composure under the weight of his focused attention. You're partially right, he finally said. I am accustomed to people agreeing with me, and I do have more power than most people in this industry. But you're wrong about my motivations. I'm not interested in hiring you because I want to control you, or because I'm impressed by your defiance. I'm interested because you demonstrated yesterday that you have something I can't buy or teach. Genuine integrity. Under pressure. Mr. Stone, Maya said, setting down her water glass with deliberate care. I appreciate your offer, but I'm not interested in being anyone's project or charity case. I have 6 months left in my MBA program, and I intend to finish what I started. I also have some experience with wealthy men who make grand gestures and impressive promises, and I've learned that those promises often come with expectations and conditions that aren't discussed up front. I prefer to build my success on my own terms, at my own pace, without owing anyone anything I'm not prepared to give. The reference to other wealthy men was delivered with enough edge to suggest painful experience, and Alexander felt an unexpected surge of curiosity mixed with something that might have been jealousy. Fair enough, he said, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket and placing it beside her water glass. But I'd like you to consider something. Sometimes the best opportunities come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes taking a calculated risk is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of achieving. My offer stands, Maya. If you change your mind, call me. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. And for what it's worth, I don't make offers lightly, and I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. As Alexander Stone walked out of the private dining room, Maya remained seated at the perfectly set table, staring at the business card he'd left behind. The elegant cardstock felt substantial in her fingers, his name embossed in simple black lettering that somehow conveyed more authority than flashy logos or elaborate designs. She thought about her father, who had taught her to trust her instincts and never compromise her values for anyone, no matter how powerful or persuasive they might be. But she also thought about the genuine respect in Alexander's voice when he'd spoken about her integrity, and the way he'd accepted her rejection without argument or manipulation. The charm bracelet on her wrist caught the dining room's soft lighting, each small charm representing a lesson her father had taught her about honor, hard work, and the importance of choosing your own path. But as Maya sat alone in the elegant private dining room, surrounded by the trappings of a world she served but didn't inhabit, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alexander Stone represented something more complex than the wealthy men who had disappointed her in the past. There was something in his eyes that suggested depths she hadn't expected, vulnerabilities that contradicted his controlled exterior. And despite every rational reason to dismiss his offer and forget their encounter, Maya found herself slipping his business card into her purse as she prepared to finish her shift, telling herself it was just in case, just to keep her options open in a world where options were often in short supply. Maya was reviewing financial projections in the corner booth of her favorite coffee shop near Columbia when Alexander Stone materialized at her table like a figure from a dream she couldn't quite remember. 3 days had passed since their dinner at Sage. 3 days of Maya determinedly focusing on her coursework while his business card burned a hole in her wallet like an unanswered question. She looked up from her laptop to find him standing beside her table with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was half sheepish, half determined. I promise this isn't stalking, Alexander said, setting one of the cups down across from her textbooks. I was in the neighborhood meeting with a potential investor, and I saw you through the window. I thought you might appreciate a proper coffee, the kind that doesn't taste like it was brewed in a machine that hasn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. Maya glanced at the cup he'd placed before her, noting it was exactly how she liked it. Medium roast with just a splash of cream. No sugar. The fact that he'd somehow observed and remembered her coffee preferences from their brief encounter felt both thoughtful and slightly unsettling. "You have good observation skills for someone who was supposedly focused on business meetings," Maya said, closing her laptop but not moving her books to make room for him. "I'm curious how many details about people you unconsciously catalog, or if this level of attention is reserved for women who turn down your job offers." Alexander smiled at her directness, settling into the booth across from her with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to inserting himself into situations where he might not be entirely welcome. "Actually, it's an occupational hazard. When you spend your life evaluating restaurants and service quality, you notice everything: how people take their coffee, whether they check their phone while eating, the way they treat servers when they think no one important is watching." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of the calculated assessment she'd grown to expect from men in expensive suits, but found instead something that seemed genuinely curious and unguarded. "So, this is still an evaluation, just in a different setting?" she asked, taking a sip of the coffee and trying not to acknowledge how perfectly he'd gotten it right. "No," Alexander said, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised them both. "This is me being curious about a woman who handed me back a dollar bill with more dignity than most people bring to million-dollar negotiations. I'd like to know what shaped someone who can maintain that level of grace under pressure." The conversation that followed unfolded with the easy rhythm of two intelligent people discovering unexpected common ground. Maya found herself sharing stories about her father's small restaurant in Brooklyn, the way he'd taught her that hospitality was about creating moments of joy for strangers, that every meal served was an opportunity to make someone's day slightly better. Alexander listened with an attention that felt different from the focused assessment he'd brought to their previous encounters. This was personal curiosity, the kind that couldn't be faked or manufactured for strategic purposes. "He sounds like someone who understood the soul of hospitality," Alexander said when Maya finished describing her father's approach to cooking and customer service. "Too many people in this industry get caught up in the business side and forget that we're really in the business of creating experiences, of making people feel cared for in small but meaningful ways." There was something wistful in his voice, a suggestion of loss or longing that made Maya look at him more closely. "What about your family? Did they influence your decision to go into restaurants?" Alexander's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the easy warmth replaced by something more guarded and complex. "My family sees restaurants as investments and profit margins. They appreciate good food and service, but they don't understand the passion that drives people like your father. People who see cooking and hospitality as forms of art, rather than just business opportunities." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I sometimes think I went into this industry as a way of rebelling against their pragmatism, trying to find something they couldn't reduce to spreadsheets and quarterly reports." Maya heard the loneliness beneath his words, the isolation that came from being surrounded by people who couldn't or wouldn't understand the things that mattered most to you. It was a feeling she recognized from her own life, the challenge of maintaining your values and dreams in environments that didn't always support or appreciate them. "That must be difficult," she said quietly, "loving something that your family sees only in terms of profit and loss." Alexander met her eyes, and for a moment, the successful businessman facade fell away entirely, revealing someone who was genuinely touched by her understanding. "It is," he admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in two different worlds, the one where I'm expected to be a stone and live up to family expectations, and the one where I actually care about the work I'm doing and the people it affects. Most people only see the first version, which is probably why I was so intrigued by someone who seemed to see right through both of them." The honesty in his voice was startling, and Maya realized that whatever game or test she'd been expecting had been replaced by something more genuine and vulnerable. They talked for nearly 2 hours, The conversation ranging from business philosophy to childhood memories, from dreams deferred to ambitions that felt too large to speak aloud. Maya found herself sharing her plans to open her own consulting firm after graduation, focusing on helping small restaurants improve their operations without losing their authentic character. Alexander described his vision of expanding Stone Hospitality Group in ways that honored local food cultures rather than imposing corporate uniformity. The more they talked, the more Maya began to see past his wealth and power to the person underneath. Someone who was genuinely passionate about hospitality and frustrated by the limitations that came with family expectations and corporate responsibility. When Alexander's phone rang, breaking the spell of their extended conversation, Maya was surprised to realize how much time had passed and how comfortable she'd become in his company. "I should let you get back to your studies," he said, declining the call and reaching for his wallet. "But before I go, I wanted to ask you something that has nothing to do with job offers or business opportunities." Maya raised an eyebrow, curious about this shift in tone. "I'm hosting a charity gala next week to raise money for culinary scholarships, programs that help people from backgrounds like yours pursue careers in hospitality. I'd like you to come, not as a potential employee, but as someone who might have valuable insights about the kinds of barriers young people face when they're trying to enter this industry." Maya felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that came with invitations into worlds where she didn't quite belong, but also a genuine interest in the cause he'd described. "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Stone, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for an event like that. Charity galas tend to be populated by people who write checks rather than people who actually need the scholarships." Alexander smiled at her honesty, appreciating her directness even as he tried to find the right words to convince her. "That's exactly why I need you there. I want donors to hear from someone who understands the real challenges, not just the sanitized version we usually present at these events. Your perspective could make a real difference in how people understand the impact of their contributions." As Maya considered his invitation, she found herself thinking about her father's belief that education and opportunity should be available to anyone willing to work for them, regardless of their background or financial circumstances. The chance to advocate for people like herself, people with talent and drive but limited resources, felt like an opportunity to honor his memory in a meaningful way. "All right," she said finally, surprised by her own decision. "I'll come to your gala, Mr. Stone, but I want to be clear that I'm accepting because I believe in the cause, not because I'm interested in impressing your donors or advancing any personal agenda." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Alexander said, standing to leave but hesitating as if there was something else he wanted to say. "And Maya, thank you for the conversation. I haven't talked about the real reasons I love this business in a long time, and I'd forgotten how good it feels to share that passion with someone who understands it." As he walked away, Maya remained in the coffee shop booth, staring at her reflection in the window and trying to process the unexpected turn her afternoon had taken. The charm bracelet on her wrist caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass, and she found herself thinking about her father's advice to trust her instincts about people, to look beyond surfaces to the character underneath. There was something about Alexander Stone that defied her expectations and challenged her assumptions about wealthy, powerful men. He was certainly privileged and probably accustomed to getting his way, but there was also a genuine quality to his passion for hospitality, and a loneliness that resonated with her own experiences of feeling caught between worlds. As Maya packed up her books and prepared to head home, she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting his invitation to the charity gala would mark the beginning of something significant, though she wasn't quite ready to examine what that something might be or whether she was prepared for the complications it might bring to her carefully ordered life. The charity gala at the Plaza Hotel unfolded like a scene from a movie Maya had watched but never imagined herself inhabiting. She stood in the opulent ballroom, her borrowed black evening gown fitting perfectly thanks to her roommate's keen eye for alterations, and tried to reconcile the elegance surrounding her with the practical reality of her student budget and work-study schedule. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, while Manhattan's elite mingled with champagne flutes and the casual confidence that came from belonging in spaces like this, without question. Alexander found her near the silent auction display, studying a weekend package to a vineyard in Napa. with the focused attention she usually reserved for financial statements. "You look beautiful," he said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and an expression that seemed genuinely appreciative rather than merely polite. Maya accepted the champagne while fighting the flutter of awareness that his proximity created, reminding herself that she was here as an advocate for culinary scholarships, not as Alexander Stone's date, despite the way other guests kept glancing between them with obvious speculation. "This is quite an impressive event," Maya said, gesturing toward the crowd of elegantly dressed donors and the sophisticated auction items that represented more money than she'd seen in years. "I have to admit, I'm curious about how you plan to work genuine advocacy into an evening that seems designed more for networking and social positioning than actual education about the scholarship recipients." Alexander smiled at her directness, appreciating the way she could cut through social pretense to focus on substance even while surrounded by Manhattan's most accomplished socializers. "Actually, I was hoping you'd help me with that," Alexander replied, guiding her toward a quieter corner where they could speak without being overheard. "I've arranged for a few scholarship recipients to speak during dinner, but I'd like you to introduce their stories and provide context about the barriers they've overcome. Your perspective as someone who's navigating similar challenges could make their experiences more real and immediate for people who might otherwise see scholarships as abstract, charitable concepts rather than life-changing opportunities." Maya felt a familiar mixture of nervousness and determination at the prospect of speaking to this accomplished crowd, but also a sense of purpose that aligned with her father's values about using whatever platform you had to help others achieve their dreams. "I'd be honored to help," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "These programs can literally change the trajectory of someone's life, and I think people who have the resources to support them should understand the real impact of their generosity." The evening progressed with the smooth efficiency that characterized high-end charity events, but Maya found herself genuinely engaged by conversations with donors who seemed sincerely interested in understanding the hospitality industry's challenges and opportunities. She spoke with restaurant owners who had built their businesses from nothing, philanthropists who understood the connection between education and economic mobility, and young professionals who remembered their own struggles to establish careers in competitive industries. Alexander watched her navigate these interactions with growing admiration, noting how she could adapt her communication style to each audience while maintaining her authentic perspective and values. It was during the cocktail hour, as Maya was discussing culinary education programs with a group of potential donors, that she encountered Victoria Stone for the first time. Alexander's mother approached their conversation with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention and deference, her silver hair perfectly styled and her designer gown making a statement about wealth and taste that was both elegant and intimidating. Maya felt the subtle shift in energy as Victoria joined their circle, the way conversations became more formal and measured in her presence. "You must be Maya," Victoria said, extending a perfectly manicured hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alexander has mentioned you. He said you work at one of the restaurants we're considering for acquisition. How interesting that you're here tonight." There was something in Victoria's tone that felt like assessment disguised as politeness, and Maya recognized the coded language that wealthy people often use to establish social hierarchies without being overtly rude. "Yes, I work at Sage while completing my MBA," Maya replied, matching Victoria's formal tone while maintaining eye contact. "I'm here tonight because I believe passionately in educational opportunities for people from all backgrounds, and I wanted to support Alexander's efforts to expand access to culinary training programs." She was careful to position herself as an advocate rather than a romantic interest, though she sensed that Victoria had already drawn her own conclusions about Maya's presence at the gala. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Victoria asking pointed questions about Maya's background, education, and future plans that felt more like an interrogation than casual social inquiry. Maya answered honestly while growing increasingly aware that she was being evaluated according to criteria that had nothing to do with her qualifications or character. When Victoria excused herself to speak with other guests, Maya felt both relieved and unsettled by the encounter, though she couldn't quite articulate why Alexander's mother's approval or disapproval should matter to her. Later, as Maya was returning from the restroom, she overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. Victoria Stone was speaking with two other women near the bar, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen even when they might prefer not to. Alexander is going through one of his phases again, trying to prove some point about understanding the common people. This girl tonight is just another example of his tendency to romanticize poverty and mistake temporary infatuation for genuine connection. She's pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly suitable for anything serious. These little diversions usually run their course once he realizes the fundamental incompatibility. Maya felt the words hit her like physical blows, each phrase designed to diminish and dismiss her presence in Alexander's life. The casual cruelty of being referred to as a diversion and a phase was devastating enough. But the suggestion that her background made her inherently unsuitable for Alexander's serious consideration felt like a rejection of everything her father had taught her about the value of character over circumstances. She stood frozen in the hallway, fighting the urge to flee and the equally strong impulse to march back into that conversation and defend herself against accusations that revealed more about Victoria Stone's prejudices than about Maya's worth. When Alexander found her 20 minutes later, Maya was standing on the hotel's terrace, staring out at the city lights and trying to process the emotional whiplash of the evening. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I was worried you'd disappeared without saying goodbye. The speeches went incredibly well. You were amazing up there, and I think you really helped people understand why these scholarships matter." Maya turned to face him, and Alexander immediately recognized the hurt and anger in her expression, the way she'd withdrawn into herself like someone preparing for a fight. "Your mother thinks I'm a temporary diversion," Maya said without preamble, her voice carefully controlled but carrying an edge that made Alexander's stomach drop. "She was kind enough to explain to her friends that you're going through a phase of romanticizing poverty and that our fundamental incompatibility will become obvious once the novelty wears off. I thought you should know what she really thinks about your choice to bring someone like me to an event like this." Alexander felt fury and embarrassment wash over him in equal measure, followed by the sick realization that his mother's prejudices had hurt someone he was beginning to care about deeply. "Maya, I'm so sorry," Alexander said, reaching for her hand only to have her step away from his touch. "My mother's opinions don't reflect my feelings or my judgment, and I'm horrified that she would say something so cruel and dismissive. You are not a phase or a diversion. You're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met, and anyone who can't see that is revealing their own limitations rather than identifying yours." Maya heard the sincerity in his voice, but the damage had already been done. The seed of doubt planted by someone who clearly had the power to influence Alexander's life in ways that Maya couldn't compete with. "The problem isn't just what she said, Alexander," Maya replied, using his first name deliberately for the first time. "The problem is that she said it with such casual confidence, as if my unsuitability was so obvious that it didn't even require discussion. And the bigger problem is that part of me wonders if she might be right. If the differences between us are so fundamental that whatever attraction exists between us is ultimately unsustainable." The honesty in her admission surprised them both, and Alexander felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this woman's opinion of him and their potential relationship mattered more than he'd been prepared to acknowledge. "She's not right," Alexander said quietly, stepping closer but not trying to touch her. "But I understand why her words would make you question everything. I've spent my entire life disappointing my family by caring about the wrong things and valuing the wrong qualities in people. If my mother's approval was what I was seeking, I would have married one of the society women she's been introducing me to for the past decade. The fact that you challenge her assumptions about what I should want is one of the things I find most compelling about you." Maya looked at him in the soft light filtering from the ballroom, seeing past his expensive tuxedo to the man who had talked about loneliness and family pressure with such vulnerability at the coffee shop. Rain began to fall softly around them, creating an intimate bubble that separated them from the glittering event continuing inside. "Alexander," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I don't know how to navigate a world where someone's mother can dismiss me so completely based on my zip code and my job title. And I don't know if you really understand what you're asking of someone like me when you invite me into spaces where I'll always be seen as an outsider, no matter how accomplished or intelligent I might be. The space between them crackled with tension and unspoken longing. Two people from different worlds trying to bridge a gap that felt both insignificant and insurmountable. When Alexander finally reached for her, cupping her face gently in his hands, Maya didn't pull away this time. "Then help me understand," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Help me learn how to make this work, because I can't stop thinking about you, and I don't want to." The kiss that followed was inevitable and desperate, filled with the weight of their differences and the strength of their attraction, rain falling around them like a blessing or a warning as they crossed a line that would change everything between them. 3 days passed after the charity gala kiss before Alexander contacted Maya. 3 days during which she threw herself into her MBA coursework with the kind of focused intensity that usually helped her process complicated emotions. When his text finally came, it was simple and direct. "I'd like to cook for you. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, my place. No tests, no games, just dinner." Maya stared at the message for a full 10 minutes, her thumb hovering over the keyboard as she weighed the implications of saying yes to an invitation that felt like crossing into entirely new territory. She found herself standing outside a sleek Manhattan high-rise the following evening, her father's charm bracelet catching the lobby's crystal lighting as she gave Alexander's name to the doorman. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt both endless and too brief. Time enough to question her decision, but not enough to change her mind and flee. When the elevator doors opened directly into Alexander's penthouse apartment, Maya's first thought was that this wasn't a home so much as a carefully curated display of wealth and taste. All clean lines and expensive art that spoke of professional decoration rather than personal attachment. Alexander appeared from what she assumed was the kitchen, wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed and approachable than she'd ever seen him. "Welcome to my sanctuary," he said with a self-deprecating smile that suggested he was aware of the apartment's intimidating perfection. "I know it doesn't look particularly lived in, but I spend most of my time traveling between restaurants, so this place functions more as a hotel than a home. I thought we could eat on the terrace. I've set up something that I hope feels more personal than all this corporate elegance." He led her through sliding glass doors onto a rooftop terrace that took her breath away, not just for the spectacular view of Manhattan stretching in every direction, but for the intimate dinner setting he'd created amid the urban grandeur. A small table was set with simple white dishes and flickering candles, surrounded by strings of warm lights that transformed the space into something magical and private. The contrast between the apartment's cold perfection and this warm, thoughtful arrangement told Maya more about Alexander's true nature than any conversation they'd shared. "This is beautiful," Maya said, genuinely moved by the effort he'd put into creating an atmosphere that felt both sophisticated and welcoming. "I have to admit, I was expecting something more formal and intimidating. This feels like you actually want me to be comfortable here." Alexander pulled out her chair with a smile that seemed both nervous and pleased by her reaction. "I wanted to show you who I am when I'm not trying to be the successful businessman everyone expects me to be. Tonight isn't about impressing you with my resources. It's about sharing something real with someone whose opinion matters to me more than I probably should admit." The meal Alexander had prepared was a revelation that spoke to his genuine understanding of food and hospitality. He'd recreated dishes that reminded Maya of her father's cooking. Simple, honest flavors elevated by technique and care rather than expensive ingredients or elaborate presentation. The braised short ribs were tender enough to cut with a fork. The roasted vegetables carried the kind of caramelized sweetness that only came from patient attention. And the risotto was creamy perfection that spoke of constant stirring and careful timing. Each bite carried emotional weight, connecting her to memories of family dinners and her father's belief that cooking was an act of love made tangible. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Maya asked, savoring the complex layers of flavor in what appeared to be a simple preparation. "This isn't restaurant cooking. This is the kind of food that comes from understanding how ingredients work together, from caring about the people you're feeding more than the impression you're making. Alexander's expression softened with something that might have been vulnerability or pride, and Maya realized she'd touched on something important to his sense of identity. "My grandfather taught me," Alexander said, setting down his fork and looking out over the city lights. "He was a chef before the family money made cooking seem unnecessary and impractical. My parents wanted me to focus on business and finance, but I spent summers in his kitchen learning that food was about more than sustenance. It was about connection and care and creating moments of joy for other people. He died when I was 16, and I think part of my decision to go into hospitality was a way of honoring what he taught me about the soul of cooking." Maya heard the grief and love in his voice, recognizing the same passion for hospitality that had driven her father's approach to cooking and customer service. "He would be proud of what you've built," she said quietly. "Not just the business success, but your understanding of what makes hospitality meaningful. This dinner tonight, it's exactly what my father would have called cooking with love rather than ego." Alexander met her eyes across the candle-lit table, and Maya saw something shift in his expression. A dropping of the final defenses that had kept their conversations in safe, professional territory. "Maya," Alexander said, his voice carrying a weight that made her pulse quicken, "I need you to know that what's happening between us isn't casual for me. I've never felt this kind of connection with anyone, and I've certainly never trusted anyone enough to show them who I really am beneath all the expectations and obligations. You make me want to be a better person, not just a more successful businessman." The honesty in his admission was startling, and Maya felt her own carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble under the weight of his sincerity. "I'm scared," Maya admitted, the words emerging before she could stop them. "I'm scared of caring about someone whose world is so different from mine, someone who could disappear from my life as easily as he appeared in it. I've seen what happens when people from my background get involved with wealthy, powerful men. We become convenient until we become inconvenient, and then we're left picking up pieces of ourselves that we didn't even realize we'd given away." Alexander reached across the table to take her hand, his touch gentle but firm, anchoring her to the present moment rather than the fears that threatened to overwhelm her. "Then don't give me pieces," Alexander said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Give me everything, and trust me to handle it with the care it deserves. I know my world can be complicated and demanding, but I also know that finding someone who sees who I really am is worth fighting for, worth changing for, if necessary." The promise in his voice was matched by the intensity in his eyes, and Maya felt herself falling into something deeper and more dangerous than anything she'd experienced before. The conversation that followed unfolded with the kind of emotional honesty that transforms casual attraction into something profound and lasting. Alexander spoke about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted things from him rather than wanting to know him, about the pressure of living up to family expectations that often conflicted with his own values and desires. Maya shared her fears about losing her independence and identity in a relationship with someone whose resources could solve her problems but might also diminish her sense of personal agency and accomplishment. As the evening deepened and the city lights twinkled below them like fallen stars, Maya found herself drawn into Alexander's arms with a naturalness that surprised them both. The kiss they shared was different from the desperate passion of the charity gala. This was tender and exploratory, filled with the kind of reverence that came from recognizing something precious and fragile. When Alexander suggested they move inside, Maya followed him with a certainty that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Crossing the threshold into intimacy with someone whose capacity to change her life was matched only by her growing desire to let him try. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of his bedroom, Maya traced patterns on Alexander's chest while he played with her hair, both of them reluctant to break the spell of connection that had settled around them. "I have something I need to tell you," Alexander said quietly, his voice carrying a tension that made Maya lift her head to look at him. "There are some complications with the business right now, pressure from the board, family obligations that I've been avoiding. I wanted you to know because whatever happens, I don't want you to think it has anything to do with how I feel about you or what this means to me. Maya felt a familiar chill of anxiety at the mention of business complications and family pressure, remembering Victoria Stone's dismissive comments about temporary diversions and incompatibility. "What kind of complications?" she asked, though part of her already suspected that the answer would involve the kind of corporate politics and family dynamics that could easily overwhelm whatever personal happiness they'd found together. Alexander's hesitation before answering told her that her instincts were correct, and she braced herself for revelations that might threaten the fragile trust they'd been building. "The company is facing some challenges that require strategic alliances and partnerships to resolve," Alexander said carefully, his arms tightening around her as if he could protect her from the implications of what he wasn't quite saying. "My family believes that personal relationships should align with business interests, and they're pressuring me to make decisions that would strengthen our position in ways that might complicate what we're building together." Maya felt her heart sink, even as her mind raced to understand the full scope of what he was trying to tell her, recognizing the beginning of the kind of impossible choice that had destroyed other relationships between people from different worlds. The charm bracelet on her wrist caught the moonlight streaming through the penthouse windows, each small charm representing a promise her father had made about the importance of staying true to yourself no matter how difficult the circumstances became. As Maya lay in Alexander Stone's arms, surrounded by luxury she'd never imagined experiencing and feeling more emotionally connected to another person than ever before, she couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound happiness was already under threat from forces beyond their control. But for tonight, in the quiet intimacy of shared vulnerability and mutual trust, she chose to focus on what they had rather than what they might lose, storing up moments of connection against whatever challenges the future might bring. Maya discovered the engagement announcement the way most people learn devastating news in the digital age, through a notification she wasn't expecting while scrolling through business headlines during her morning coffee. The photograph that accompanied the article showed Alexander standing beside a stunning blonde woman in a designer gown at what appeared to be an exclusive corporate event, their poses suggesting practiced familiarity and shared social status. The headline read, "Stone Hospitality Group announces strategic partnership and personal alliance," and Maya's stomach dropped as she realized she was looking at the business complications Alexander had alluded to during their intimate evening 2 weeks earlier. The woman in the photograph was Emma Bradford, according to the article, daughter of Bradford International's chairman and heiress to a hotel empire that would perfectly complement Stone Hospitality Group's restaurant holdings. The announcement spoke of synergistic business opportunities and long-standing family friendships, using language that made their engagement sound more like a corporate merger than a romantic decision. Maya stared at her phone screen in the crowded coffee shop, feeling simultaneously invisible and exposed as other customers went about their morning routines, oblivious to the fact that her world was crumbling with each carefully crafted sentence. She made it through her morning classes on autopilot, her mind replaying every conversation she'd had with Alexander while searching for signs she'd missed, warnings she'd ignored, moments when he might have been preparing her for this inevitable conclusion. The rational part of her brain understood that wealthy families often arranged marriages for business purposes, that personal happiness was frequently sacrificed for corporate advantage. But the emotional devastation was too overwhelming for rational analysis. By the time she arrived at Sage for her evening shift, Maya felt hollowed out and fragile, moving through familiar routines while trying to process the magnitude of her miscalculation. Emma Bradford appeared at Sage during the dinner rush, her arrival creating the kind of subtle disturbance that occurred when someone accustomed to commanding attention entered a space where they didn't quite belong. She was beautiful in the effortless way that came from genetic privilege and professional styling, her designer outfit perfectly appropriate for the restaurant's upscale atmosphere, while still managing to suggest that she was slumming in a space beneath her usual standards. Maya recognized her immediately from the engagement photograph, though seeing her in person made the reality of Alexander's betrayal feel sharper and more immediate. "You must be Maya," Emma said, approaching the hostess station where Maya was reviewing reservation lists with forced concentration. "I'm Emma Bradford, Alexander's fiancée. I was hoping we could have a private conversation about your relationship with my future husband." Her voice carried the kind of cultivated politeness that wealthy people used to deliver devastating messages, sweet enough to maintain plausible deniability while sharp enough to draw blood. Maya felt every muscle in her body tense as she recognized the calculated nature of this confrontation. The way Emma had chosen a public space where Maya couldn't respond with the full force of her anger and hurt. "I'm working right now," Maya said evenly, though her hand shook slightly as she set down the reservation book. "If you have something to discuss with Alexander, I suggest you speak with him directly rather than approaching me at my workplace." Emma smiled with the kind of condescending warmth that never reached her eyes, settling into the hostess station as if she owned it along with everything else in her orbit. "Oh, but this concerns you directly, and I think it's important that we understand each other clearly. Alexander may have given you the impression that your little romance was meaningful, but I'm here to help you see the bigger picture." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, disguised as friendly guidance. Emma spoke about Alexander's history of brief infatuations with inappropriate women, his tendency to romanticize people from different social classes until reality reasserted itself and he returned to more suitable partnerships. She described their engagement as the natural result of family planning and business necessity, suggesting that Maya had been naive to think that genuine affection could overcome fundamental incompatibilities of wealth, education, and social position. "Alexander is going through a phase," Emma explained with patronizing gentleness. "The way wealthy men sometimes do when they want to feel connected to real people and authentic experiences. But phases end, and when they do, he'll need to be with someone who understands his responsibilities and can support his ambitions rather than limiting them. I'm not telling you this to be cruel. I'm telling you because I think you seem like a nice girl who deserves to understand the situation clearly rather than clinging to false hopes." Maya listened to Emma's carefully crafted destruction with a growing sense of fury that felt both familiar and foreign. The familiar part was the class-based dismissal, the assumption that her background made her inherently unsuitable for serious consideration by someone of Alexander's status. The foreign part was the depth of her emotional investment in the relationship Emma was systematically destroying, the way each word felt like a personal attack on her worth and judgment. When Emma finished her speech and waited expectantly for Maya's response, the silence stretched between them like a challenge. "Thank you for the education," Maya finally said, her voice carefully controlled despite the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her composure. "I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to explain how the world really works to someone too naive to understand her place in it. I'm sure Alexander will be touched by your concern for his reputation and your willingness to handle the messy details of ending his inappropriate relationships." Emma's smile faltered slightly at Maya's tone, perhaps recognizing that her victim wasn't responding with the expected humiliation and retreat. "I'm glad you understand," Emma said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty now. "Alexander is a good man, but he sometimes needs protection from his own generous impulses. He'll be much happier with someone who can match his ambitions rather than constraining them with unrealistic expectations about love conquering all." Maya nodded thoughtfully, as if seriously considering Emma's perspective, while internally calculating how much damage she could inflict with words chosen as carefully as Emma's weapons had been. "You know what's interesting, Emma?" Maya said, leaning forward slightly with a smile that was all sharp edges beneath its polite surface. "You seem to know a lot about Alexander's feelings and motivations for someone who's secure in their relationship. Happy couples usually don't feel the need to hunt down their partner's former interests and explain why those relationships were meaningless. But I suppose when your engagement is really a business transaction, you have to work harder to convince yourself and others that it's based on genuine affection." The direct hit landed exactly as Maya intended, and Emma's composed facade cracked just enough to reveal the insecurity and calculation underneath. "My relationship with Alexander is none of your concern," Emma snapped, her practiced politeness finally giving way to genuine anger. "He made his choice, and it wasn't you. I suggest you accept that reality and move on before you embarrass yourself further by clinging to something that was never real." Maya felt the words hit their intended target, but instead of the devastating impact Emma expected, they sparked something fierce and defiant in Maya's chest. "You're right. Maya said, standing up and smoothing her work dress with deliberate care. Alexander made his choice, and now I get to make mine. Thank you for clarifying the situation so thoroughly. It's exactly the kind of honesty I needed to make some important decisions about my future. Emma looked momentarily confused by Maya's response, perhaps expecting tears or pleas rather than this calm acknowledgement and dismissal. Maya turned back to her work with the kind of professional grace that ended conversations definitively, leaving Emma to make her exit with less satisfaction than she'd clearly expected from their encounter. When Alexander arrived at Sage 2 hours later, clearly frantic and searching for Maya with the desperate energy of someone trying to control damage he knew was already irreparable, Maya was ready for him. She'd spent the intervening time processing Emma's revelations and her own emotional responses, reaching a clarity that felt both painful and liberating. Alexander approached her with the expression of someone preparing to explain the unexplainable, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked remarkably like fear. Maya, I can explain everything, Alexander began, his voice carrying the kind of urgency that confirmed everything Emma had told her. The engagement announcement. It's not what it looks like. It's a business arrangement that my family pressured me into, and I've been trying to find a way out of it that doesn't destroy everything my grandfather built. Maya listened to his explanation with the detached attention she might give to a particularly unconvincing sales pitch, noting how he positioned himself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her humiliation. Your fiancé stopped by this evening, Maya said when Alexander finished his plea, her tone conversational despite the way his face went pale at her words. Emma was very helpful in explaining how these arrangements work, how wealthy men sometimes need suitable wives for business purposes while maintaining more passionate relationships on the side. She seemed to think I might be interested in that kind of arrangement, given my limited options and obvious gratitude for your attention. Alexander's expression shifted from panic to horror as he realized the extent of the damage Emma had inflicted. That's not what I want, Alexander said desperately, reaching for Maya's hands only to have her step back from his touch. I never asked her to approach you, and I certainly never suggested that you should be a secret or a side arrangement. What Emma described isn't what I feel for you or what I want our relationship to be. Maya heard the sincerity in his voice, but it was overwhelmed by the crushing reality of what he was and wasn't willing to sacrifice for their relationship. But it's what you're willing to accept, Maya replied quietly, the truth settling between them like a wall that couldn't be breached by good intentions or passionate feelings. You're willing to marry someone else for business reasons while expecting me to wait patiently for whatever attention you can spare from your more important obligations. That's not love, Alexander. That's convenience disguised as romance. The accuracy of her assessment seemed to hit him like a physical blow, and Maya saw him struggle to find arguments that even he could believe. I'm trying to find a solution, Alexander said, his voice breaking slightly with the strain of defending a position he knew was indefensible. The business is in crisis, and if I don't secure this partnership, I'll lose everything my family has built over 3 generations. I just need time to figure out how to honor my responsibilities without losing you. Maya felt something break inside her chest at his words, not from surprise, but from the finality of understanding that she would always come second to his other obligations, that their love would always be conditional on circumstances beyond their control. Time, Maya repeated, as if testing the word for hidden meanings. How much time, Alexander? 6 months while you plan a wedding to another woman? A year while you establish your marriage and figure out how to manage a secret relationship? Or maybe indefinitely, while I build my life around waiting for you to decide that I'm worth more than your family's approval and business interests? Each question landed with devastating accuracy, and Maya watched Alexander realize that he had no good answers, no timeline that wouldn't require her to sacrifice her dignity and self-respect for the possibility of his eventual commitment. The charm bracelet on Maya's wrist caught the restaurant's soft lighting as she reached for her purse, each small charm representing a lesson her father had taught her about knowing her own worth and refusing to accept less than she deserved. I won't be your consolation prize or your guilty pleasure, Maya said with quiet dignity that cut deeper than any accusation could have. I won't wait in the shadows while you marry someone else and hope that someday you'll find the courage to choose love over convenience. You've made your decision, Alexander, and now I'm making mine." As Maya walked away from Alexander Stone for what she knew would be the final time, she felt the weight of her broken heart alongside something that might have been relief. The fairy tale was over, but she was still standing, still intact, still capable of choosing her own path forward without compromising the values her father had instilled in her. Behind her, she heard Alexander call her name one last time, but she didn't turn around. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay that way, and Maya Chen had always been strong enough to walk away from anything that required her to become smaller than she was meant to be. 2 weeks passed in a blur of forced normalcy that felt like living underwater. Maya attended her MBA classes, completed assignments with mechanical precision, and worked her shifts at Sage, while carefully avoiding any mention of Alexander Stone or the engagement that had dominated business headlines for days. She moved through her routine with the determined focus of someone who had decided that survival required compartmentalization, that healing meant refusing to acknowledge the depth of the wound until it stopped bleeding quite so freely. Her roommate had stopped asking questions after the first few days, recognizing that Maya's brittle composure was a defense mechanism rather than genuine recovery. The job offer from Meridian Restaurant Group arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered via email with the kind of professional enthusiasm that suggested they'd been pursuing her for weeks rather than days. The position was everything Maya had theoretically wanted: a consulting role with a growing company, excellent salary and benefits, immediate start date, and, most importantly, a location in San Francisco that would put 3,000 miles between her and every painful reminder of her relationship with Alexander. She stared at the offer letter for 20 minutes, knowing she should feel excited or relieved or at least professionally satisfied, but experiencing only a hollow numbness that suggested she was still too emotionally raw to feel anything beyond basic functionality. Maya was scheduled to give her answer by the following Monday, which meant she had 4 days to decide whether to rebuild her life on the West Coast or stay in New York and risk constant reminders of what she'd lost. She found herself taking longer walks through the city, unconsciously avoiding the neighborhoods where she and Alexander had shared meals or conversations, while simultaneously drawn to familiar places that held memories she wasn't ready to abandon. The coffee shop where they talked about family and dreams felt like neutral territory, a space that belonged to her independent of their relationship, and she often found herself studying there when her apartment felt too confining. It was during one of these extended coffee shop sessions that Tom Martinez tracked her down, sliding into the booth across from her with the grim expression of someone delivering bad news. "Maya, I need to talk to you about Sage," he said without preamble, his usual diplomatic approach abandoned in favor of direct communication that immediately put her on high alert. "We're being forced to sell. The owner received an offer he can't refuse, and we have 30 days to close. I wanted you to hear it from me before the official announcement goes out to staff tomorrow morning." Maya felt the news hit her like another betrayal, though she understood rationally that restaurant closures were common in an industry where profit margins were thin and real estate was expensive. Sage had been more than just a job for her. It was the place where she'd learned to navigate the intersection of service and dignity, where she'd discovered her talent for hospitality management, where she'd first encountered Alexander Stone and begun the relationship that had ultimately broken her heart. Losing it felt like losing the last stable foundation in a life that had already been turned upside down by forces beyond her control. "Do you know who's buying it?" Maya asked, though something in Tom's expression suggested she might not want to hear the answer. "The buyer is remaining anonymous for now, but the terms are aggressive. Full cash purchase, immediate closure, no consideration for existing staff or operational continuity. It feels personal rather than business, if that makes sense. Like someone with a grudge against the restaurant specifically, rather than someone looking for a profitable investment opportunity." Maya's blood chilled as she processed the implications of Tom's description, recognizing the kind of vindictive power play that wealthy people sometimes use to eliminate inconveniences. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity over the following hours as Maya researched property transactions and corporate filings with the analytical skills her MBA program had taught her. The anonymous buyer was a shell company that traced back to Victoria Stone's personal investment portfolio, and the timeline of the purchase aligned perfectly with the engagement announcement and Emma's threatening visit to the restaurant. Maya realized she was witnessing the systematic destruction of her life by people who had the resources to eliminate anything that threatened their carefully constructed social order. Maya found herself standing in Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery that evening, visiting her father's grave for the first time since the anniversary of his death 6 months earlier. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the headstones that marked lives completed and dreams interrupted. She knelt beside the simple granite marker that bore her father's name and the dates that bracketed a life devoted to family, hard work, and the belief that integrity was worth more than convenience or comfort. "I don't know what to do, Dad," Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible above the wind rustling through the cemetery's ancient trees. "Everything you taught me about standing up for myself and not letting people diminish me. I've tried to live by those lessons, but I feel like I'm being punished for refusing to accept less than I deserve. The man I thought I loved chose his family's expectations over our relationship, and now his mother is destroying my job as revenge for my existence. I could run away to San Francisco and start over, but that feels like letting them win." The charm bracelet on her wrist caught the last rays of sunlight, each small charm representing a conversation with her father about courage, resilience, and the importance of choosing principles over profit. Maya remembered his stories about customers who had tried to intimidate or diminish him, wealthy patrons who assumed that their money gave them license to treat service workers with disrespect and cruelty. He had always maintained his dignity while refusing to be anyone's victim, finding ways to assert his worth without compromising his professional integrity or personal values. As darkness settled over the cemetery and Maya prepared to leave, she heard footsteps approaching along the gravel path. She turned to see Alexander walking toward her with the careful hesitation of someone who knew he had no right to intrude but couldn't stay away. He looked haggard and exhausted, his usual polished appearance replaced by the rumpled clothes and hollow expression of someone who hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. Maya felt her heart clench despite her anger, recognizing the depth of his distress even as she reminded herself that his suffering didn't excuse his choices. "How did you find me?" Maya asked, rising to face him with her arms crossed defensively. "I didn't think billionaires made a habit of wandering through Brooklyn cemeteries in the evening." Alexander stopped several feet away, respecting her need for distance while clearly struggling with his own desire to comfort and be comforted. "I've been looking for you for days. Tom told me about the job offer in San Francisco, and I realized I might never see you again if I didn't find a way to explain what's really happening. Your mother bought Sage to force me out of New York," Maya said flatly, cutting through whatever explanation Alexander had prepared. "She's systematically eliminating my life here as punishment for having the audacity to care about her son. So please don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is all some terrible coincidence or unavoidable business circumstance." Alexander's face crumpled with genuine anguish at her words, confirming what Maya had already suspected about Victoria Stone's involvement in her professional destruction. "I didn't know," Alexander said, his voice raw with emotion and exhaustion. "I swear to you, I had no idea what she was planning until it was already done. When I found out, I tried to stop the sale, but the contracts were ironclad and the damage was already done. Maya, I've been fighting my family for weeks, trying to find a way out of this engagement that doesn't destroy everything. But every solution I come up with creates new problems that hurt more people." Maya heard the sincerity in his voice, but it was overwhelmed by the reality of what his family's power had cost her, and would continue to cost anyone who threatened their plans. "Fighting how, exactly?" she asked, her tone sharp with skepticism. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're going through the motions of resistance while still planning to marry Emma Bradford and take over the family business exactly as your mother intended. Where I come from, we call that having your cake and eating it too." "I called off the engagement," Alexander said quietly, the words hanging in the evening air like a confession. 3 days ago, in front of the entire board of directors. I told them that I couldn't marry someone I didn't love for business reasons, no matter what it cost the company or the family. Emma was furious. My mother threatened to disown me, and the board voted to remove me as CEO effective immediately. I've lost everything, Maya. The business, my family's support, the future I thought I was supposed to want. The news hit Maya with unexpected force, though she struggled to process its implications through the haze of her own pain and anger. And you're telling me this because you want my sympathy? Because you think sacrificing your inheritance makes up for the weeks you spent lying to me about your intentions? Because you assume I'll be grateful that you finally chose me after losing everything else? Alexander flinched at her harsh assessment, but he didn't deny the accuracy of her interpretation. I'm telling you because I love you, Alexander said with desperate honesty. I'm telling you because I realized that none of the things I thought were important actually matter without you in my life. I'm telling you because I want to fight for us, if you'll let me, even though I understand why you might not be able to forgive what I've put you through. Maya felt tears threatening for the first time since Emma's visit to the restaurant, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Alexander claimed to have sacrificed and the impossibility of trusting someone whose choices had already caused so much damage. Love isn't enough, Maya said, her voice breaking slightly despite her efforts to maintain emotional distance. Love without respect, without consideration, without the courage to choose the right thing when it's difficult. That's not really love at all, Alexander. That's just wanting someone when it's convenient and expecting them to wait while you figure out how to make it work without sacrificing anything you're not ready to lose. The truth of her words settled between them like a verdict, and Maya saw Alexander realize that the damage he'd caused might be irreparable, regardless of his belated attempts to make amends. As Maya walked away from Alexander for the second time, leaving him standing alone among the tombstones that marked other people's finished stories, she felt something shift inside her chest. The anger and hurt were still there, but underneath them was a growing sense of clarity about what she wanted and what she was willing to accept. She had a choice to make: San Francisco and a fresh start, or New York, and the courage to rebuild her life in a city that held both painful memories and professional opportunities. Either way, she would make that choice based on her own needs and ambitions, not as a reaction to someone else's failures or attempts at redemption. The charm bracelet caught the streetlight as Maya emerged from the cemetery, each small symbol representing the strength her father had tried to instill in her about knowing her worth and refusing to settle for less than she deserved. Tomorrow, she would give Meridian Restaurant Group her answer, and whatever she decided would be the first step toward a future built on her own terms rather than shaped by other people's expectations or limitations. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt like herself again. Bruised but not broken, disappointed but not defeated, ready to choose her own path forward regardless of who tried to block her way. Maya sat in the gleaming conference room of Meridian Restaurant Group's Manhattan office, her signed contract spread across the polished mahogany table like a bridge to a future that felt both promising and hollow. She had accepted their San Francisco offer that morning, scheduled to relocate in 10 days, and was meeting with their New York team to finalize transition details and client handovers. The salary was everything she'd dreamed of during her MBA program. The opportunities for advancement were substantial, and the 3,000-mile distance from Alexander Stone felt like the emotional breathing room she desperately needed to heal and rebuild her professional identity. The meeting was interrupted by Sarah Chen, Meridian's executive assistant, who entered with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested important news requiring immediate attention. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Sarah said, addressing Maya directly with an expression that mixed confusion and excitement. "But there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent and relates to your previous employment at Sage Restaurant. Security cleared him, but he's not on your appointment calendar, and frankly, he seems a bit intense." Maya felt her stomach drop with the familiar mixture of hope and dread that had become her default response to unexpected disruptions. Alexander Stone stood in the reception area like a man who had been awake for days, his usually immaculate appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and the hollow-eyed determination of someone operating on pure willpower rather than rest or food. He was holding a thick manila folder and what appeared to be legal documents, his entire demeanor suggesting that whatever had brought him here was too important for normal social protocols or professional courtesy. When he saw Maya emerge from the conference room, his expression shifted from desperate resolve to something that might have been relief mixed with terror. "Maya, thank you for seeing me," Alexander said, his voice carrying the strained quality of someone who had been rehearsing crucial conversations for hours. "I know you're busy, and I know I'm probably the last person you want to deal with right now, but I have something that belongs to you, and I need to give it to you before you leave for San Francisco." Maya crossed her arms defensively, noting how her Meridian colleagues were watching this interaction with obvious curiosity and professional concern about their new hire's personal complications. "If this is another attempt to explain your choices or apologize for your family's behavior, I'm not interested," Maya said, keeping her voice level despite the way her heart raced at his proximity. "I've made my decision about the future, and it doesn't include relitigating the past with someone who had ample opportunity to make different choices when they actually mattered." Alexander nodded, as if he'd expected this response, pulling the manila folder closer to his chest like a shield against her justified anger. "It's not an apology," Alexander said quietly. "It's ownership papers. For Sage Restaurant. I bought it back from my mother's shell company, and I'm transferring it to you. Complete ownership, no conditions, no strings attached. It's yours, Maya. The restaurant where we met, where you showed me what real hospitality looks like, where you taught me that integrity isn't negotiable regardless of the circumstances." He extended the folder toward her with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion or nervousness, or both. Maya stared at the offered documents without taking them, her mind struggling to process what Alexander was suggesting and why he would make such a gesture now when it was too late to change anything fundamental between them. "I can't accept a restaurant as a gift, Alexander. Even if I wanted to, which I don't. That's not how business works, and it's certainly not how relationships recover from the kind of damage we've experienced. You can't buy forgiveness or obligation with grand gestures and expensive presents." Alexander's expression didn't change, but Maya saw something flicker in his eyes that suggested he'd anticipated this objection. "I'm not trying to buy anything," Alexander replied, setting the folder on the reception desk and stepping back to create physical distance that somehow made his offer feel less threatening. "I'm trying to honor what you taught me about doing the right thing regardless of the personal cost. Sage belongs with someone who understands what it represents, someone who can preserve its character while helping it grow. You're the only person I've ever met who has the vision and integrity to make that happen." Maya felt the attention of everyone in the reception area focused on their conversation, the weight of professional scrutiny adding another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. "Can we talk privately?" she asked, gesturing toward an empty conference room where they could continue this discussion without providing entertainment for her new colleagues. Alexander followed her into the glass-walled space with the careful movement of someone who understood that this might be his last opportunity to explain himself. "Why now?" Maya asked once they were seated across from each other at another polished conference table. "Why this dramatic gesture when you had weeks to find a different solution? When you could have fought for us before I was forced to rebuild my entire life around your absence?" Alexander leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had been waiting for this exact question, who had been preparing for this moment of accountability. "Because I finally understood what I should have realized from the beginning," Alexander said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested profound personal reckoning. "I spent so much time trying to find a way to keep you while preserving everything else that I never considered the possibility of choosing you over everything else. I was so afraid of losing the business and disappointing my family that I didn't realize I was guaranteeing the loss of the only thing that actually mattered to me." Maya heard the sincerity in his words, but she also heard the echo of similar promises from other conversations, other moments when Alexander had seemed to understand the stakes only to default to familiar patterns when faced with real choices. And what's different now? What's changed that makes this grand gesture more meaningful than all the other times you've claimed to understand what matters? Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a resignation letter, placing it on the table between them with deliberate care. "I resigned from Stone Hospitality Group permanently," Alexander said. "Not just as CEO, but as an heir and family member. I have dissolved my trust fund, liquidated my personal assets, and used everything to buy Sage back and establish a culinary scholarship program that will fund hospitality education for people from backgrounds like yours. I'm starting over, Maya. No family money, no corporate connections, no safety net except my own knowledge and experience in an industry I love. The magnitude of what Alexander claimed to have sacrificed hit Maya like a physical blow. The realization that he had essentially destroyed his previous life in an attempt to prove his commitment to principles she had challenged him to embrace. "You gave up everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your inheritance, your family relationships, your entire identity as a stone. You threw it all away." Alexander nodded with the calm acceptance of someone who had already grieved these losses. "I didn't throw it away," Alexander corrected gently. "I chose something else instead. I chose the possibility of building a life based on what I believe in rather than what I inherited. I chose the chance to earn your respect, even if I can never earn back your love. And I chose to honor your father's memory by creating opportunities for people who have his same values and your same determination to succeed on their own terms." Maya felt tears threatening for the first time since their cemetery confrontation, overwhelmed by the scope of Alexander's transformation and the impossibility of processing what it meant for her own carefully reconstructed future. "The scholarship program?" she managed to ask. "How does that work?" Alexander's expression softened with something that might have been pride or hope, and Maya realized this was the part of his plan that mattered most to him. "It's called the David Chen Memorial Scholarship," Alexander said, referring to her father by name with a reverence that made Maya's breath catch. "Full tuition and living expenses for hospitality students from working-class backgrounds, with mentorship programs and guaranteed internships at partner restaurants. The first recipients will be announced next month, and the program is designed to be self-sustaining through restaurant profits and industry partnerships. Your father's values, integrity, hard work, treating everyone with dignity, those are the selection criteria." The conference room fell silent except for the distant hum of Manhattan traffic and Maya's own racing heartbeat as she struggled to comprehend the depth of research and planning that Alexander's gesture represented. He had created something permanent and meaningful that honored her father's memory while addressing the exact barriers she had faced in pursuing her hospitality education. It was the kind of legacy her father would have been proud to have associated with his name, and the fact that Alexander had initiated it without expectation of personal reward suggested a level of understanding that went far beyond grand romantic gestures. "And the restaurant?" Maya asked, though she was beginning to understand that Sage represented something larger than a simple business transaction. "What happens to it if I don't accept your offer?" Alexander smiled with the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him since their disastrous final conversation, and Maya realized that he had planned for every possible outcome rather than assuming her acceptance. "If you take the San Francisco job and don't want Sage, it becomes the flagship location for the scholarship program. A training restaurant where recipients can gain real-world experience while earning living wages. If you stay in New York but don't want ownership, you can run it as the general manager with complete operational authority and profit sharing. And if you decide you want to own it, it's yours free and clear. No conditions except a promise to maintain the scholarship program as part of its mission." Alexander paused, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made Maya feel exposed and understood simultaneously. "Whatever you choose, Maya, I'll respect your decision completely. This isn't about winning you back. It's about doing what should have been done from the beginning." Maya stared at the ownership documents that would make her a restaurant owner at 26, the culmination of dreams she'd barely dared to articulate during her hardest moments of financial struggle and professional uncertainty. The scholarship program represented the kind of systematic change that could transform lives and communities, creating pathways for people who shared her background and her father's values to build careers in hospitality without sacrificing their integrity or independence. And Alexander's willingness to sacrifice everything he'd inherited to make these things possible suggested a level of character growth that she hadn't thought possible. "There's something else," Alexander said, reaching into his pocket one final time to pull out a small jewelry box that made Maya's heart skip with alarm. "This isn't what you think it is," he added quickly, seeing her instinctive retreat from anything that suggested romantic pressure. It's something that belongs to you that I had repaired. He opened the box to reveal Maya's father's charm bracelet, which had broken during Emma's confrontational visit to Sage, now restored with new links and an additional charm she didn't recognize. The new charm, Alexander explained as Maya reached for the bracelet with trembling fingers, represents the scholarship program, a small chef's hat with your father's initials engraved inside. I wanted him to be part of what we're building, even though I never had the chance to meet him and ask for his blessing. Maya fastened the bracelet around her wrist with the careful reverence of someone handling a sacred object, feeling the weight of her father's memory and Alexander's transformation, settling into something that felt like possibility rather than loss. The decision Maya faced was more complex than choosing between 2 job offers or 2 cities. It was about choosing between the safety of a fresh start and the courage to build something meaningful in a place that held both painful memories and unexpected opportunities. As she sat in the Meridian conference room with Alexander waiting silently for her response, Maya realized that her father's most important lesson hadn't been about avoiding risk or protecting herself from disappointment. It had been about recognizing when something was worth fighting for and having the courage to choose growth over safety. I'll need to see the full business plan for the scholarship program, Maya said finally, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was considering. And I want complete operational control of the restaurant, with the authority to hire and fire staff, design menus, and establish policies without interference from anyone, including you. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way, using everything my father taught me about hospitality and everything my MBA taught me about business. Alexander nodded with an expression of profound relief and respect. Of course, he said. This is your vision to execute, your restaurant to run, your program to shape. I'll be available for consultation or support if you want it, but Sage belongs to you now, and so does the scholarship program. The only thing I ask is the opportunity to earn back your trust slowly over time, through actions rather than promises. Maya looked at the ownership documents, the scholarship materials, and the man who had dismantled his entire previous life to create these opportunities, and felt something shift in her chest that might have been forgiveness or might have been hope. Trust will have to be earned, Maya said, signing the ownership papers with her father's restored charm bracelet catching the conference room lights. But partnership might be possible if you can prove that this transformation is real and permanent rather than another strategic move designed to get what you want. Alexander smiled with the kind of joy that suggested he hadn't expected even this much consideration. And Maya realized that whatever they built together would be something entirely new rather than a restoration of what they'd lost. 6 months later, Maya stood in the completely renovated Sage restaurant, watching the first class of David Chen Memorial Scholarship recipients complete their final presentation to a room full of industry professionals and potential mentors. The restaurant had become exactly what she'd envisioned. A place where exceptional food and service created opportunities for both diners and staff, where her father's values of integrity and hospitality guided every decision and interaction. The scholarship program had exceeded all projections, with a waiting list of qualified applicants and industry partners eager to provide internships and career opportunities. Alexander appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne, his presence now familiar and comfortable rather than overwhelming or complicated. They had rebuilt their relationship slowly and carefully, through shared work rather than romantic gestures, through mutual respect rather than desperate passion. The man who stood beside her now was someone she had chosen rather than someone who had chosen her, and the difference was everything her father had tried to teach her about knowing her own worth. Your father would be proud, Alexander said quietly, watching a young woman from Queens present her business plan for a community-focused catering company. The scholarship recipients aren't just getting education. They're getting the tools to change their communities and create opportunities for others. Maya nodded, feeling the weight of her father's memory and the responsibility of honoring his legacy through work that mattered more than profit or personal success. He would be proud of you too, Maya said, surprising them both with the admission. For having the courage to start over, for choosing principles over privilege, for building something that matters more than what you inherited. Alexander smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered that earning respect was more fulfilling than inheriting it, that building something meaningful was worth more than maintaining something prestigious. As the evening wound down and Maya prepared to lock up her restaurant for the night, Alexander pulled her aside with the nervous energy of someone about to make an important request. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice carrying the same uncertainty he'd brought to their first real conversation months ago. "But I want you to know that whatever your answer is, it won't change our partnership or the work we're doing together." Maya raised an eyebrow, curious about what could make someone who had learned to be confident in their professional relationship still nervous about personal requests. Alexander knelt beside the stove where Maya had first shown him what real hospitality looked like, pulling out her father's charm bracelet, which he had borrowed earlier that evening under the pretense of having another charm added. The bracelet now held a simple gold ring threaded through the chain, and Maya realized that Alexander had found a way to propose that honored her father's memory while respecting her independence and their carefully rebuilt trust. "Maya Chen," Alexander said, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was asking. "Will you marry me? Not because I can offer you wealth or status or security, but because we've built something together that's worth protecting and celebrating. Because you've taught me what love looks like when it's based on respect and shared values rather than need or convenience. Because I want to spend the rest of my life earning the privilege of being your partner in everything that matters." Maya looked down at the ring that represented not just a proposal, but a transformation, his and hers and theirs together. "Yes," Maya said, taking the bracelet and fastening it around her wrist where it belonged, the new ring catching the kitchen lights like a promise of possibilities they would create together. "But I have conditions." Alexander laughed with the relief of someone whose greatest fear had been not meeting her standards rather than being rejected entirely. "Name them," he said, and Maya realized that this was exactly the response she had hoped for. Not automatic agreement, but genuine curiosity about her expectations and boundaries. "We build everything together as equal partners," Maya said. "The restaurants, the scholarship program, our marriage, our future. Everything gets decided by both of us, with both our names on everything that matters, and we never forget where we came from or why this work matters more than profit or prestige." Alexander nodded with the solemnity of someone making sacred vows, and Maya knew that whatever challenges they would face them as partners who had chosen each other with full knowledge of the costs and benefits involved. As Maya and Alexander stood together in the kitchen of Sage Restaurant, surrounded by the evidence of what they had built through mutual respect and shared vision, Maya felt her father's presence like a benediction. The charm bracelet on her wrist held the weight of his memory and the promise of their future, each charm representing a lesson learned and a value preserved through all the changes and challenges that had brought them to this moment. Love, Maya realized, wasn't about finding someone who could solve your problems or complete your identity. It was about finding someone who shared your values and was willing to build a life that honored both your individual strengths and your collective dreams. The last charm Alexander had added to the bracelet was a small key, representing the keys to Sage and to the future they would create together. As Maya touched it gently with her finger, she thought about her father's belief that the right doors would open for people who refused to compromise their integrity, and she knew that whatever came next, she and Alexander would face it with the courage and honesty that had made their love possible. The test that had started their relationship had become the foundation for a partnership that would honor her father's memory, while creating opportunities for countless others to achieve their own dreams of success and belonging.